Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history of the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today here. It is Monday, April 20th, 2015. We're getting on through the month here. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. And we're going to start off today's show with some really good news. They've just declared a tornado watch in Washington, D.C., and I sure hope that the tornado misses all those really cool museums, because there's one thing you can say about Washington, D.C. A lot of great museums. I've never actually been there. Always wanted to visit. I want to visit the National Archives. I'd like to see the original Declaration. Obviously, I'd love to visit the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museums. And I understand some of the stuff that I worked on many, many years ago at JPL is on display there. And I'm going to tell you right now, nothing makes you feel older than walking into a museum and seeing something you've worked on display there. You just feel your hair turning white and the wrinkles setting in on all of that. All right, let's get into the serious news here. Huge amount of violence going on pretty much all over the world. It does feel like we're in this race to start a major war on which to drop the blame for the coming economic crash, so that Wall Street and Washington, D.C. don't have to take responsibility for the policies and decisions they've made. And they can say, well, yeah, it's a wreck, but it's those gosh darn Russians, it's those gosh darn Chinese. We are not to blame. We're never to blame. We're politicians. Well, apparently 410 landmines deployed from Ukrainian positions have targeted Shirokino and exploded over the last 24 hours. Now, I know a lot of people of my age think of a landmine as something where they dig a hole, put the mine in, cover it over with dirt very gently, and they walk away. But a lot of mines can be deployed as remote munitions, either through artillery or cluster munitions or various other and sundry. So apparently they're using those out there. Now, as you know, U.S. trainers, advisors, we promise they won't be in combat, have now arrived in Ukraine for Operation Fearless Guardian. And I don't know about you, some of these names they're coming up with just strike me as silly beyond belief. Operation Fearless Guardian. Well, if they're trainers, maybe we ought to call it Operation Clean the Blackboard after recess or something like that. But Fearless Guardian does sound like they're already getting ready to go into combat. Iran is declaring this. This is a provocation. It's an escalation. The U.S. is escalating the violence in Ukraine by sending in weapons and these trainers. Now, the Russian military have succeeded in breaking Kiev's water blockade of Crimea, because Crimea was getting most of its water through a major water pipeline coming down from Ukraine, and Kiev shut it off in an effort to try and thirst Crimea into coming back into the slavery of the European Central Bank. And apparently the Russian military succeeded in laying a new pipeline from Russia to Crimea, a distance of 125 kilometers. And so now Crimea is getting plenty of water. Certainly far more than the people out in California are. Maybe we need the Russians to run a pipeline to California. There's an idea. Just run it across the Bering Straits and down the side of Canada and just, hook it up with that pipeline that they're already going to build to bring water from Alaska down to California. That'd solve a few problems here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, Empire of Chaos. We're at an end game now. Yeah, you can feel it. You got all this unrest in the world, which we're behind, and the same with the British government and Israel and Brussels, and you got all these Jade Helm and Maple Resolve going on. This ain't a coincidence. All this is tied into the economy and the collapse. It's a slow process,
Well, it's it's going a lot slower than General Wesley Clark revealed when he blew the whistle on this whole U.S. plan to conquer all the oil nations, because it was all supposed to be done in 2008, and here we are in 2015. I don't agree we're in the end game. I do agree that a crisis is coming because the U.S. has really lost control of its foreign policy. They weren't expecting to have to go into back into Iraq a third time, or back into Libya a second time, or back into Yemen a second time. And they're bogged down in all of these areas, and all the propaganda about, oh, we're bombing suspected weapon sites and these are bad people. The Americans understand, no, this is not what's going on. What's going on is all these nations around the world are sick and tired of U.S. puppet rule. And nothing new with that. We have seen countries break free of U.S. puppet rule before, which usually results with the U.S. Blockading them like they did Cuba, or just making stink face and saying, oh, well, why they hate us for our freedoms? You know, we didn't do anything wrong to Chile or Iran or all those other countries. They just hate us because we have Disneyland and we have Miley Cyrus hanging on a wrecking ball. That's why they hate us. And after a while, it just wears very, very thin. But at this point, we know the propaganda is completely uncoordinated. We know that we're bogged down militarily in all of these having to reconquer these pesky provinces that insist on breaking away. U.S. military stockpiles are drawn down. Our weapons are wearing out. The new weapons are all junk. And I really do get a sense that the rush is on to get World War III going for real, so that Wall Street and Washington, D.C. can dump the blame for the coming economic crash on them. And they're in a rush right now because when Greece defaults and leaves the European Union, there are going to be repercussions all over Europe and the United States economy because of all this economic globalism and derivatives and all these unregulated gambling casinos called credit default swaps. And they let it happen because the bankers were making huge amounts of money and they were writing big fat campaign checks to the politicians. They created a mess of this global economy they told us was going to be such a good thing. And when it all comes apart, and it's coming apart now, they're looking for somebody to blame because as a class of human beings, politicians never accept responsibility for their mistakes. They never admit error. They never change course. They never turn around and go back. They'll take credit for anything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it. And anything bad happens is always somebody else's fault.
Hey, Mike, what do you... Well, oh, sorry. You can finish.
I was going to say, and again, this is nothing new in history. Ancient kings, even Renaissance medieval kings, if it was a really good harvest, the king would say, I'm responsible because God loves me.
That's the thing, though, in America, Americans don't think, they always like, that can't happen here, that can't happen here. And the times change, you know, like, I mean, people stay the same, so it can happen anywhere. You throw a ball up in Zimbabwe, it falls. You throw a ball up in Weimar Republic, it falls. You throw a ball up in the USA and it falls.
Yeah, it is. It can happen here. It is happening here. I was having a discussion over the weekend with somebody who is aware of all the wars going on, but really hadn't started to consciously deal with the possibility of the implications here in Hawaii of a war with Russia and China. And I said, look, all the command, control, and communication for the entire Pacific Fleet comes through Pearl Harbor and Diamond Head. Those are going to be the first strike targets if there's a nuclear exchange here. And this guy was saying, oh, come on, that's never going to happen here. And I said, you know something? On December 6th, 1941, most Hawaiians would have agreed with you.
Yeah, Mike, you're a target for a couple 150 kiloton warheads. That's not a good place to be.
Well, yeah, we're a little nervous about it, and unfortunately, if it's the Russians, they're going to use smaller warheads, and we'll just kick back and watch the show. If it's the Chinese, they're just going to flatten the entire place because of the accuracy problems they have. And, you know, we do have contingency plans. You know, if we see the rockets heading up out of the ships in the harbor, we've got a bailout bag in the car. We're going to drive north on the H-2 and watch from afar. But, yeah. People need to start waking up and realizing this is getting real. And all those horror movies you've seen about nuclear Armageddon and the aftermath could happen to us in our lifetime if we don't get our politicians back under the control of we the people. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Dustin, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And over in Kiev, more wet work is going on here. Oleg Kalishnikov was killed apparently just one day after leading a protest in front of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. So it may be that Poroshenko isn't doing all this wet work just on his own. Meanwhile, another Kiev website is calling for mass deportations and internment of dissenters in Ukraine. Anybody supporting Russia or criticizing Kiev could face 5 years in prison. Doesn't sound like we're bringing democracy to those people over there in Ukraine. Now, Cuban leader Raul Castro has arrived in Moscow for the Victory Day parade. This is turning into a major political embarrassment for the U.S., which said they would not go and turns out weren't invited anyway. A lot of U.S. allies in Europe were invited, are saying, no, they're not going to go. But Raul Castro was there. And this is significant because my theory about why Obama is normalizing relations with Cuba was to prevent Russia from gaining a foothold back in Cuba for a coming war. But if Raul Castro is in Russia and Putin makes him a more attractive deal than the U.S. is doing, which so far isn't much of anything other than we'll lift the blockade on certain items coming out of Cuba. Russia may be back in Cuba after all, because Putin's in a position to make very generous deals, not just with Cuba, but all over Europe, with Greece, with Cyprus. Russia's making deals, the U.S. is making war. Who do you think is going to come out ahead in the long run? All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Judy in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. It's really nice to talk with you. I've listened to your radio show in archive for a while now, and you're one of the talk show hosts, I think, that are really just putting the truth out there. I'm basically calling about my concern with how the Jade Helm situation is actually shaping up and what the implications may or may not be. I seem to think that it's possible that they're trying to keep the American public happy and standing down to see what they can get away with, and I'm concerned about what could be pulled on American soil in order to actually, start a civil war.
Let it go live. Okay, now, as it's being presented, and by the way, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of utter nonsense about Jade Helm, and somebody was sending me emails about the underground tunnels Jade Helm will be using and all this other nonsense stuff. The fact that these exercises are taking place only in certain states suggests to me that they are just exercises. Colorado changed their mind, pulled out, said we don't want to have anything to do with it. And if this was, in fact, an intentional power grab, the federal government would have come back to Colorado and said, no, you're still in, whether you like it or not. Now, that doesn't rule out the possibility that just as Jade Helm is deployed to all their training zones, there's another false flag and the drill goes live, because we know that is something that is a consistent pattern. There was a backpack bombing drill taking place in Boston when the bombing actually happened. There was a FEMA drill taking place in New York the day before 9/11, talking about hijacked jetliners crashing into buildings. We know that when the London subway was bombed, there was a security drill taking place at the exact same time, talking about bombings on the subway. So Jade Helm may be just it's a drill. We're going to put all these soldiers out on American soil, and then all of a sudden there's a big bang. Well, thank goodness our people were in position to intervene and so forth. A lot of confusion. I'm still not sure exactly what this means. It could just be a major saber rattle to scare the American people into being silent and, scare people from speaking out here. I don't think it's really working all that well, but there is, at this point, no question that what they are practicing to do with these exercises is take control of cities from their civil government, round up people and sequester them and basically carry out a lot of these so-called FEMA executive actions that are activated in the event of a national emergency. So all we can do is keep an eye out and be prepared to hunker down and see what's going to go on. But I know a lot of people are very angry about this. We're sick and tired of the militarization of our police, let alone outright military on our streets, which is a violation of posse comitatus.
Absolutely. Well, it's also the fact that there's been some commentators that I've heard actually talk about the fact that the northern portion of the United States is, precariously not being talked about, and that in itself is its own little red flag that maybe needs to be looked at. But, the focus is put on the southern hemisphere because of, the open border. But what's most concerning to me with the potential of, a false flag going off and the demonization of anybody that's conservative. I'll just use that one word, conservative. Really, really bothers me. But it's also just the weakness of the dollar and the fact that at any time they can, say it's no longer the world reserve currency and, all treasuries are sold off, by China and whomever else owns it. We go the way of the Weimar Republic.
Well, we're definitely headed that way. I mean, the world is already de-dollarizing. China is selling off their treasuries. I don't know who they're finding that's dumb enough to buy them. But the process of the world breaking free from U.S. dollar hegemony is well and truly underway right now. As far as Jade Helm is concerned, you may be onto something there, thinking that they're mostly dealing with these states that are on the border with Mexico, not all of them. But again, they're only talking about these exercises in 10 states. And if they were all of a sudden to say these 10 states are now federalized, I think the other 40 states would immediately start arming their own borders.
No, I should hope so. I mean, I would love to see, all states, show their autonomy in the final analysis, and that, maybe America can move forward in a rational fashion where there's actually cooperation between the states and we could ignore the federal government.
Well, that was how it was originally set up.
I don't see that happening.
That was how it was originally set up. The states and the people had the authority. The federal government was limited. And again, another reason to not think that this is going to be a establishment of a dictatorship in the United States of America. The U.S. is already hideously overextended militarily in Iraq, Yemen, Libya, 14 countries. I've lost count how many out there. Nothing is going to lose this new world war faster for the United States than an internal civil war, using up resources, using up personnel, and basically just ending any popular support for more wars in the American people. If they were stupid enough to try this, it basically would mean they're going to lose all those other wars because they're already overstretched. In fact, I think the reason Obama is pushing for this deal with Iran is he's understanding he's now got to prioritize and stage the wars because they can't win them all at the same time. Anyway, Judy, we're coming up here on another commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to have a few commercials, and we'll be right back in just a couple of minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Getting on back to the news here. Vladimir Putin is going to visit Armenia on April 24th to participate in the genocide commemorative events. Now, this is a big stink going on right now. We had the Pope come out and say that, yes, what happened in Armenia was a genocide. Turkey, of course, says absolutely not. It wasn't. Israel's out there saying nobody suffered genocide but us, so please shut the heck up, and it's going on back and forth, back and forth. But Putin is, in fact, going on to Armenia for their commemoration of their genocide. And yes, genocides happen all throughout history. Most Americans could probably be forgiven for thinking that it only happened in Nazi Germany, because that is certainly the subtext of all that we've been getting out of Hollywood for these last several decades. But genocides do happen. Cambodia, a good example over there. Now, a Russian lawmaker is out there accusing 5 states as coordinating an anti-Russian campaign at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Now, this is Alexei Pushkov saying that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and the United Kingdom are the ones that are still out there screaming, yes, we should maintain the anti-Russian sanctions, even though the rest of the European Union nations are saying, no, it's time for them to end. The people of every one of those nations are saying it's time for it to end. They're all suffering grievous economic harm from these sanctions in this rush to war. Story we're looking at in Global Research about how NATO is increasingly surrounding and threatening Russia. Because war is good for business. Well, war is only good for the war business. And for the war business to be making billions and trillions of dollars, that money is taken away from other businesses and other people. When they say war is good for business, it's not like the money just magically appears and business is booming over here in the defense contractors. It's resources being diverted away from schools, away from education, away from social services, away from the roads, away from the hospitals, away from the infrastructure, the water systems. All of that stuff has to be put on hold in order to feed that war machine. That even hit us back during Hurricane Katrina. Remember when the levees collapsed and flooded that whole district in New Orleans? And it turned out the section of levee that had been collapsed had been in the process of being repaired, rebuilt, renovated. And it got halfway through the process when the budget was cut because they needed to spend the money on the war in Iraq. And they were running out of the sandbags to try and deal with the damage because even the sandbags had been sent over to Iraq to allow the construction of temporary shelters. When they say war is good for business, it's only good for the war business and it is bad for everyone else because every dollar spent on war is a dollar taken away from the peaceful side of our society. Eisenhower just nailed it in his Cross of Iron speech. And if you've never read that, go out to your search engine and just type in Eisenhower and then in quotes Cross of Iron and read what he said. This was a president who knew firsthand the sting of war and what it cost. Supreme Allied commander in World War II. And then elected president, and while he was president, did everything he could to reduce the power and threat of the military-industrial complex. Because he could see how that much money and political power in the war industries was distorting our democracy. And he sounded a warning, which unfortunately too few Americans were heeding back then. All righty, now they've just had elections up in Finland. And this may put a little damper on NATO's enthusiasm for a war with Russia because apparently a lot of the top spots in the Finland general election went to anti-NATO candidates and parties. Finland is not sure they still want to be part of the NATO alliance, especially with the NATO alliance clearly at the forefront of escalating Ukraine into a new world war with Russia. And Finland, like all those other nations in Europe, they saw the last one fought on their front yards. They don't need another one. Now, down in Yemen, they've got another one of these really wonderful marketing design campaign names. Operation Decisive Storm, which is the name they've got for this U.S. organized Saudi-led mass murder against the people of Yemen for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler. That's what this is all about. It's not about Houthis. It's not about rebels. It's not about ISIS. It's not about Al-Qaeda. It is about the people of Yemen, like the people of Libya, like the people of Iraq, like the people of Iran, like the people of Chile, like the people of Cuba, getting sick and tired of U.S. puppet rule, eviscerating their country, its productivity, and its resources for the benefit of these large money junkie corporations. That's what these wars are about. This is an exact replay of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, where Rome's empire was spread so wide and they had too few legions after they lost 3 of them in Germany. And the outlying provinces began to break away, and the legions would scurry on over and whoop on them, bring them back into the empire, and while they were doing that, another province over here would break away. And then the legions would have to scurry on over there and whoop them and try them bring them back in. And the empire began to crumble in the outlying provinces, and that's exactly what's happening to the United States empire right now. Iran broke free in 1979. The U.S. is still trying to find a reason to go on in there and reconquer them. We're in Iraq for the 3rd time. We're in Libya for the 2nd time. We're in Yemen for the 2nd time. Still trying to get into Syria. Still trying to get into Iran. That's what's going on right now. Now, there's an interesting little article over in Alternet about how the U.S. is helping Saudi Arabia commit atrocities in Yemen and then trying to say this is all the fault of Iran. And by the way, if you're listening to the corporate news, even on the SRN news break, they never talk about the people who are being bombed in Yemen without prefacing them with Iran-backed. This is all Iran's fault. Really, you've got to blame Iran. We're only bombing military targets. No, they're not. They're bombing critical infrastructure. Story ought to wake up from your slumber. Saudi airstrikes hit medical center in Yemen. They bombed a hospital in the Sirwa district. The Red Crescent is reporting the Saudis are using chemical weapons, poison gas, and children are being killed by this stuff. Anyway. Now, the U.S. Navy has announced that the aircraft carrier, the Theodore Roosevelt, is heading to Yemeni waters to intercept an Iran convoy that is sailing to Yemen. Now, everybody is just assuming, and we know what that means, this convoy is carrying weapons, and that's the excuse for the U.S. Navy to try and interdict this convoy. But Iran has made no secret of these ships sailing. They didn't try and hide it whatsoever, and from that, I would suspect these ships are probably carrying humanitarian aid because, as you heard last week, because of this U.S. organized, Saudi-led attack on the people of Yemen for throwing off their U.S. puppet ruler, half the country is now starving. It's already a humanitarian disaster, and I would not be surprised if these ships from Iran are carrying food, water, medical supplies. And if the U.S. sinks one, and there's nothing but food packages found in the wreckage, this is going to be as big an embarrassment to the U.S. as when the USS Vincent shot down that Iranian Airbus. Even if they don't sink the ships, they just turn them around. The U.S. is going to be seen as the bully maintaining a starvation blockade on a helpless people, which, by the way, is a war crime. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about all these wars all over the place here. Pakistan has also signed on to the naval blockade of Yemen. They're agreeing to send ships to block weapons shipments to the Yemen rebels, because by golly, when the people of a country decide they're going to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler, we can't give them the means, we can't let them have the means to do so. What would the world be like if every country just sort of ran itself for its own benefit? What kind of a silly idea is that, anyway? Iran is accusing the United States of arming and funding ISIS. At this point, I think pretty much everybody's realized ISIS is a propaganda tool of the U.S. It's a made-up group. 200 actors and a video production crew running around there making all these videos, and they got a new one out here, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And then they simply call anybody in a country who's standing up to U.S. foreign rule, oh, that's ISIS, we got to go kill them. Now, as you know, last week, Congress was celebrating that they had come up and forced on the White House a compromise bill to give Congress a chance to review the Iranian deal. And this was the Bob Corker-Ben Cardin bill. It passed the Senate Foreign Relations the other day. And all of a sudden they're realizing that the legislation doesn't actually have enough teeth in it where Congress can stop the deal if Obama's going ahead with it. And again, because this is not a formal treaty. It's an agreement, and it originates in the United Nations where Congress has no authority or jurisdiction. So all of a sudden, Crystal is out there screaming that he's walked into Obama's trap, and he's just wringing his hands left and right. Meanwhile, Mark Rubio is out there on the campaign trail saying he will demand that a condition of this deal is that Iran recognize Israel's right to exist. They're just trying to pile more stuff on this deal to try and sink it, is what they're out there doing. Lebanon has received their first shipment of French weapons, paid for by Saudi Arabia. Everybody's just piling on. Let's give everybody weapons, let them kill each other off, and then take what's left of their country after they're dead and gone. Now then, real quick here. As you know, there's been another one of these disasters of the Libyan migrant boats sinking. In this case, over 700 people, maybe as many as 900 when this ship went down. They were just absolutely packed in to this ship trying to get out of Libya across the Mediterranean, and it capsized and sank, and only 28 people were rescued. But you're not hearing about this. on the American corporate news. Right now, Fox News is obsessed over this video where ISIS is supposedly beheading Christians. Oh, don't care about all those people in Libya who had to leave Libya because the U.S. started yet another war there. Now, they don't count. These are Christians over here, and they're being beheaded by ISIS, and they're still trying to sell this propaganda. But this is not ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Even Nigel Farage is saying this is David Cameron that's doing this, that caused this whole situation. NATO destabilized Libya. The United States bears some of the blame as well. And as a matter of fact, there's an article over in Breitbart about how Hillary Clinton's Libya policy led to these drowned migrants, where they went in, they overthrew the Libyan government, shut down their state central bank, ended the gold dinar, put Libya's oil back on sale on the world market only for the U.S. dollar, and then Hillary summed it up by saying, we came, we saw, he died. And all those drowned Libyans in the Mediterranean are just the cost of doing business, going on into other people's countries and mucking it about for the benefit of American and European banking corporations. That's what this is all about. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Getting back to Yemen and the movement of this U.S. warship, that great big lumbering Nimitz aircraft carrier, the Theodore Roosevelt, which actually suffered the same fate as the Donald Cook, but the Theodore Roosevelt was disabled in the Baltic Sea. Had to spend 8 days in Plymouth getting repaired.
Okay, John.
But anyway,
John, can you pull the microphone of your telephone a little further away from your mouth because you're clipping right now?
Okay. Is that better?
It's a little better. We've got a bad connection. You're sounding very clipped and very muffled. Try again.
Okay. Right. So I'm looking at these 8 to 10 Iranian warships, destroyers. I mean, they can outrun that aircraft carrier easily.
Well, they can't outrun the aircraft. I mean, they can't outrun, an F-14 or an F-18 that goes chasing after them.
But my information is there's also 8 of their mini subs following this flotilla. And if America sinks one of their ships, with the Hoot torpedoes, these very fast supercavitating torpedoes, I wouldn't give much chance for the Theodore Roosevelt.
John, first of all, we need to back up. Iran has 2 warships already in the area, ostensibly to deal with pirate attacks on Iranian commerce in the region. The new flotilla that is coming out, my understanding is they've got maybe 1 military escort, but they're primarily cargo ships. And whether you believe the official story about Iran is sending weapons to Yemen, or my theory that it's probably mostly humanitarian aid, warships are not great cargo carriers. And so I don't know that this new flotilla is all warships. And, Iran may be playing this close to the chest and actually hoping that the U.S. will sink one of these ships so that Iran can say, look, we're trying to send food and medical aid to the people of Yemen, and the U.S. is sinking our ship.
Well, the Ashton-Carter statement that the only reason why we're arming Saudi Arabia is so they can protect their territory. I didn't know that Yemen had attacked anything in Saudi Arabia.
No, they haven't. Yemen's threat is they kicked out their U.S. puppet ruler, and, this is an ongoing, consistent pattern, and it's really been accelerating ever since Iran in 1979. And this old U.S. imperial model of we're going to overthrow the government, we're going to destabilize them and put in a government we like, and the people of that country, obedient sheep, will simply follow the new puppet government like they followed the old one. And it did work for a lot of years. But it's starting to fall apart because the people of these countries understand that's what's going on. And the whole idea of the Arab Spring was to throw out all these puppet rulers from their countries. And that's why the U.S. is going to war against all these countries. They need to crush the Arab Spring before the rest of the world gets the realization that if they all stand up at the same time and kick out their U.S. puppet rulers, the U.S. can't do a thing about it. The U.S. can only prevail if it's one at a time, first here, then here, then here, then here. And I think that's the reason that Obama's putting Iran on hold, because he's realizing he's running out of military resources to put down all of these other countries that just refuse to accept their U.S. puppet rulers.
Well, I think there is another realization that should be brought home to America. If they go to a serious war over Ukraine against Russia, American front lines will also be peppered with weaponry, and the weaponry will be really serious.
Well, it's a possibility. I mean, certainly, you know, for those of us here in Hawaii or up in Alaska, where we're in these militarily high-density zones, you know, it's a concern. And it's not like Russia is going to be targeting Mike and Claire living in Aiea, but they're going to be targeting those command and control centers in Pearl Harbor, and that's just right out that window, right over there. So, you know, when we actually first moved here to Hawaii, I originally had us living in an area where I thought if there was an outbreak of war, we would feel it less. But unfortunately, due to economy and shifting around, we wound up here. And this is a beautiful place where we live, don't get me wrong, but it is a ringside seat to a first strike nuclear target. If it's
actually, I was in Hawaii. I was staying in the Hawaiian Regent Hotel right on the front of Waikiki Beach, opposite Diamond Head, and I visited Pearl Harbor. I was in the Air Force at Hickam Air Force Base.
Yes.
We were playing war games with the Americans, and I drove all around that island in a 7-liter Mustang. It was beautiful. Unfortunately, it looks like it's being ruined by American militarism.
Yeah, it is. We have the highest density of military bases of any state in the Union. Every one of them has their own private golf course, too. Like, go into Google Earth and look at all these bases. They've all got their own private golf courses on a very land-poor piece of the country. We got to take a break for our news. Thank you for the phone call, John. We're going to let you go here, and we'll be back after our news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller waiting on the line here. I'm going to get to you in just a minute, but I do want to go back and reprise. About a week ago, we started seeing this story pop up that ISIS had training camps in Mexico. It was a big deal. Oh, they're down there. They're on the border. They're ready to come across and do mayhem. ISIS is going to be here in the United States of America. They're going to be tearing the tags off your couch cushions. They're going to be passing wind in elevators. They're going to be sowing dandelions and crabgrass on the lawns of America, whatever else they say that they're going to do. The story has turned out to be a complete fiction. It's just more of this propaganda. The one photo supposedly showing a training camp near Juarez looks to me to have been a miniature. They built it in small scale, and it just didn't look right from the get-go. But FBI went down there, and I'm surprised that Judicial Watch got their name on this, because up until now, everything out of Judicial Watch has been bang spot on. I'm wondering if somebody wanted to poison the well. And they somehow got this story on the inside of them to put it out under their name so that when the story gets discredited, I mean, even Fox News is saying this is nonsense, and they can say, oh, that Judicial Watch, we shouldn't listen to anything they have to say, especially about Hillary Clinton and her email server. And we have seen this before, when there was, and it was Dan Rather was looking into allegations that George W. Bush had been AWOL from his service, and somebody planted one document inside all of the evidence that obviously was a fake. And once that was exposed, they said, well, it's obviously, the whole thing is nonsense. That's what poisoning the well is. Your opponent has evidence that you have done something wrong. You get one piece of fake evidence in there, and you use it to discredit the rest. It's an old propaganda tactic called poisoning the well, and I'm beginning to think that's what was just done to Judicial Watch, because Judicial Watch's investigations into Benghazi, the email server, and the rest of it are a serious major threat to Hillary's campaign for president in 2016. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Love you and Claire. You're out there in the front line. Just a comment and a question, if you will allow me.
Sure.
Well, I think there's some good news with this whole ISIS thing, because I think Vanilla Ice is going to get a lot of calls. Wouldn't he be great for his logo and advertising? Ice baby, ice baby.
The marketing is out there. You know, they're going to have branded running shoes and vests and all the rest of it. It really is. You know, it reeks of all being created by advertisers and marketing people. And I remember there's a wonderful movie called Wag the Dog, starring Robert De Niro. If you have not seen it, you have to see it. And I love the way where they're coming together to create this illusion that there's a war going on to distract the American people from President's sex scandal. And they got a marketing guy in there who's out there with slogans, and we're gonna sell the little hats, and we've got a deal with a fast food company for sauce, and and they're just out there looking at all the merchandising. And we see a lot of that same thing going on with all of this propaganda coming out of Washington D.C. It just looks like an ad agency put it together, and you shouldn't have an ad agency doing your propaganda, because ad agencies, by their nature, they're not thinking more than a couple of weeks ahead of time. And that's why America's propaganda right now is so disjointed and unconnected and self-contradictory. There's no consistent alternative reality being presented to lure people away from what's really going on. In filmmaking terms, it's lost the narrative a long time ago, and that's why it's kind of fallen apart.
As long as we got people like you, Michael, I wish I could do what you were doing. I mean, I just...
No, you don't.
I can't even believe...
No, you don't. You don't want to wish that you were doing what I'm doing. Nobody should have to go through what we're going through over here. So shame on you. Find some other line of work.
Okay, here's one other comment. Would like to see a little more of Claire. Not that you're not great, but the feminine side sometimes kind of soothes the animal spirits.
Well, I'd rather look at her than me any day anyway, so you're not going to get an argument on that one.
She's very smart.
Yes.
I mean, everybody loves. Well, listen, my question is this, and I think you're the perfect guy to ask this. I moved from Colorado Springs about 2 years ago, and where Cheyenne Mountain is, and we all know what that's about. Raytheon just got this big contract to refurbish it. They're moving everything back in there. My question is this: if there's a nuclear exchange, let's say they know it's going to happen, how long do you think it would take? Let's assume the powers that shouldn't be, or the elite, whatever you want to call them, they know this is going to happen. Do you think there would be a period of time where people start disappearing, like Nancy Pelosi or George Bush, and they start going underground? Do you think, in your opinion, we'd have, watching those people, they're not going to stand out here and get fried with everybody. Now, it could be some reckless event where they don't, they're stupid and it just happens. I understand, mutual assurance.
Well, obviously, as people get ready to go down into the Greenbrier or Mount Weather or this new Cheyenne Mountain, they're not going to be publicizing it in the media, and it'll probably happen all together in a very quick interval of time. Because at some point the American people are going to say, hey, why are all of these people running into their little bunkers? And the U.S. has been building giant underground complexes going back, 20 years now, following the Northridge earthquake, and a whole bunch of FEMA money came into Southern California, the vast majority of which went into building a new facility for the Emergency Command Center, which is basically underneath where the Hollywood sign is. And it's a huge, huge construction. We used to see these big military helicopters going in there. While it was being built, that entire corner of Griffith Park was off limit. You couldn't drive in there, couldn't walk in there. There were fences and everything. They didn't want anybody to see what was going on in there. Rumors of a major bunker underneath the new Denver airport. It's one of the reasons why the airport itself is getting all these subsidence cracks in its structure. Got a huge one they built in the middle of the H3 freeway here on Oahu. So, everybody in government's got a bolt hole to go to. Now, the reactivation of Cheyenne Mountain, I'm scratching my head. We know that the Russians developed a nuclear weapon specifically to take Cheyenne Mountain out. So if they're reactivating Cheyenne Mountain, I'm going to take a guess here, and it is only a guess, that Cheyenne Mountain isn't intended to defend the U.S. government against Russia, but to defend the U.S. government against the American people. Just one more little place where they can go on in there and slam the door and say, ha, 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 we got all your money and power, and you're out there in the radiation and Ebola and biological weapons.
Wow. Well, it must be, because if there was they had some foreknowledge, which I believe they possibly could, they can't move there in one day. They've got to take their families. It's got to show up with the internet. It's too quick. If they see Dick Cheney and Bushes and Clintons and all them, all of a sudden they're not showing up for their talks or their appointments. That would be a heads up, you know.
Well, you know, at some point they're simply going to stop making those appointments because there will be an effort to make this as invisible to ordinary Americans as possible because we all paid for these underground bunkers, but we're not invited in. And that's probably going to be annoying to a lot of people, especially because in the process of paying for these bunkers and the wars, our nation has been allowed to literally corrode on the vine. Speaking of which, it's not going to be trivial to reactivate Cheyenne Mountain because after they abandoned it, nature took over, and there's a lot of decay and corrosion around that facility. There's going to be a lot of renovation that's going to need to be done to that place, but that's okay. The government just has all kinds of money they take away from you to build themselves their newest little bunker, and I'm sure there are probably a whole bunch that we don't even know about. Because the U.S. government loves to burrow down deep underneath, and we know there's all kinds of tunnels and bunkers under the White House as well. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Mo. We're going to let you go. John in Chicago, I'm going to take your phone call as soon as we come back from the commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to talk about the economy a little bit. And here's kind of something that really gives away the game of what's going on. Story over at Investment Watch blog. U.S. should write laws of global economy, not China. This is a statement by Barack Obama. And it confirms what I have been telling you for years. These wars across the globe by the United States of America are all about bringing the world back to some version of Bretton Woods where everybody uses the U.S. dollar for international commerce and banking. Everybody uses the U.S. dollar for buying and selling natural resources, out of which the U.S. economy gets a piece of the action through interest charges or advantageous trading agreements. And here's Obama out there. He's basically acknowledging the ruble's rise and China's economic power is threatening U.S. dominance. And so now he wants us all to enlist our young people in the Army so we can go tell those Chinese that they may not interfere with America's global control of the economy, no matter how badly the United States has screwed it up, which they have. Europe braces for messy Greek endgame. That's pretty obvious. We're seeing a lot of these out there. At this point, there's a crash coming. Greece cannot make its next payment to the IMF. Greece's new government, which was elected on the platform of getting the people of Greece off this debt hook created for them by the IMF, the ECB, Papandreou, and Goldman Sachs, are still defiant even as the creditors are trying to crank up the pressure and say, well, ship us the Parthenon. We'll take a few dollars off the end bill or something. Now, I'm looking at an article over here, another one from Investment Watch blog, saying that when Greece goes, it will go all the way. There's no way they can default and remain in the European Union without the vultures ripping them apart. So we're already looking at Greece leaving the EU, going back to the drachma, pivoting possibly toward the Russian sphere of influence. And Greece is basically desperate right now. Earlier today, the government of Greece, the central government, issued a decree ordering all government offices that have any kind of a cash reserve, transfer those reserves to the central bank to try and make up this latest payment back to the ECB. And even if by some miracle Greece pulls this off, loots their own nation to the point of making this payment, that's not going to solve the problem because there are more payments due. And the reason for making this payment is so the ECB and IMF will loan Greece even more money at interest and drive them deeper into debt. So the situation is very desperate over there. We're going to grab a phone call before we go back to Greece's debt problem. John in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'll tell you what's on my mind, Mike. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Woo!
Well, me too, but I have to watch my language on this here radio. They'll take away our license, okay?
Did you hear that, Washington, D.C.? I'm mad. Did anything change, Mike?
Bill Clinton, is that you? Sounds like him. You sound like him, yeah. It's the economy, stupid. All right.
That's right. I wanted to mention, I don't know if you mentioned the immigration thing that the EU is battling, because I was watching Russia Today this morning. They only have, a 25-minute broadcast to do their news at the top of every hour when they go live.
Yes.
So they got the little commercials in there and stuff. But they spent literally 15 minutes on the immigration issue about the people fleeing Northern Africa and drowning in the Mediterranean, and what is the EU going to do about it? And somebody, they expressed the attitude, oh, well, this is, you reap what you sow, so, this is NATO's fault. But, as sick as we are of hearing about Hillary Clinton and the elections, a year and a half away, I mean, at what point do we get these Democrats to realize that, if the Republicans want to say, oh, he wants all these immigrants in here because they're going to be Democrat voters, you can see what's going on. The blood of these people drowning in the Mediterranean is on Obama's hands and NATO's hands.
And Hillary's hands. And Hillary's hands, because Hillary was Secretary of State when the U.S. went into Libya and killed Gaddafi for daring to think he could run his country's economy without enslaving it to the international banks.
Right, and her middle name is ha ha ha, we killed Gaddafi. I mean, she's gleeful about it, right?
Yeah, she thought that was funny as all get out, and that right there, when you kill a foreign head of state and you make a joke out of it, tells you everything that you need to know about what's really going on inside Hillary Clinton's brain.
Well, and I even had neocons talk to me and say, well, it's about time, that was revenge for the Pan Am 103, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me, if you actually believe that. But no, seriously though, RT did a fantastic job of the EU and Brussels, their obligation or responsibility to those refugees drowning or fleeing Northern Africa. It's the same attitude as the State Department has about getting the Yemenis Americans out of Yemen. Honestly, they created this problem and they don't really care. And it's such a blow to humanity that you would think all these quote-unquote bleeding heart liberals, and believe me, I'm no Republican. I'm not doing a, left-right paradigm thing here. But I'm saying, how somebody better hit her with that. Going, this crisis, these people drowning, et cetera, you got your hands for this. You guys went in there and bombed Gaddafi, you blew him up, you destroyed their country. Now you've got, as Rand Paul would call it, a jihadist wonderland over there, and these people are fleeing for their lives with their family, and they're all drowning in the Mediterranean, and EU's just like, you're broke, you don't have any money, it's not our problem. We don't want them here, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to make a racial issue, here's your racial issue right here. What about those people?
Yeah.
If I quickly, just on the economy though, I drive on 94 every day between Wisconsin and Chicagoland, and that whole Trans-Texas corridor thing, right? Mm-hmm. As far as infrastructure goes, 294, the tollway in Illinois, and 94 in Wisconsin has never been better. So, that North American Union thing, I think that's a reality, because if you think about a guy like Ted Cruz running for president, and he can't, these people may be running for president of the North American Union, honestly, because they put the money into 94 from Mexico all the way into Canada, and the highway is absolutely phenomenal. A ton of money went into it. So,
it is. They're trying to form the North American Union. They want to start, the plan was to create all these regional unions, the European Union, the North American Union, the South American Union, as a stepping stone to pulling all the unions together and say, one planet under one government under one central bank.
And would that spread our debt if we just, absorb? I mean, we're not absorbing Canada or Mexico, but if all three merge together, does that take the U.S. debt and spread a little bit to them? They put it all in one big pot, and then we can that's our realignment or something?
Well, the thing is, by design, they're cranking up the debt to keep control over all of us. John, I got to let you go. Okay. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and I think this is a good time to go back and look at the analogy of what globalism is really like. Globalism is good for those who want to be on top of the pyramid and say, I'm ruler of the world, to feed their ego and vanity. But there are practical considerations. national borders do for the global economy what fireproof doors do in buildings and watertight bulkheads do in ships. They contain problems so the structure as a whole is not destroyed. You get an office fire, the fireproof doors make sure it doesn't spread. If you get a leak in the ship, only one compartment is flooded, and the ship itself is saved. But if you prop open those fire doors, or you lock open the hatches on the watertight bulkheads, it may seem like things are better because you're getting from place to place inside the building and inside the ship faster. Oh, this is great. We love it. Things are going a lot better until you get that first fire, which engulfs the entire building, or you get that first leak that sinks the entire ship. Now, over the last couple of decades, the global bankers have been trying to knock down those national borders so that they can play their money junkie games across the globe. And it worked for them in that they made huge amounts of money very quickly. But now we're seeing the downside. There's a fire in Greece, or if you prefer the other analogy, Greece is taking on water. And it's not going to stay in Greece. Now we're looking at issues where if the Bank of Greece is kicked out of the euro system, it will default on what's called the Target 2 obligations. Now this is going to result in Bundesbank and other core central banks in Europe to have to write down the debt and take a loss. These banks have all probably bought credit default swaps against Greece's debt, knowing that it was high risk. And when those credit default swaps come due, the contagion from Greece and Europe will spread everywhere, including New York City. Even the Atlantic is not going to protect us. Another article over here in Russia Today basically saying the same thing. There are no walls in place to save the Eurozone from the Greek amputation and a domino effect. There are no safeguards. The fireproof doors are propped open. The hatches on the watertight bulkheads been taken off, put in storage. And there isn't time enough to get them back in place. Now, the Gazprom CEO has arrived in Athens to discuss with the new Greek government energy needs and delivery, including involvement in construction of a pipeline that will bypass Ukraine completely so that Gazprom doesn't have to go on letting Kiev steal natural gas in order to keep its commitments to Europe. Now, obviously, for those European entities already invested in the Ukrainian pipeline, this is a major financial threat because you don't use those pipelines for free. There's a fee for the gas that you pump through them or the oil. Pipelines are very expensive to build, but they're big money makers. And so perhaps not coincidentally, as the CEO of Gazprom arrives in Athens, the European Union filed antitrust charges against Gazprom, saying, you're too big, we've got to break you up. Good luck on that when it's a Russian company. And if they decide they're going to file charges against Gazprom, Gazprom can simply say, all right, our contract's terminated, shut that valve. It's a tempest in a teapot. They're trying to come on out there and say Russia's bad, Gazprom is bad. No, Gazprom is looking out for business. Russia's taking care of the Russian people and the Russian economy. And that's what a government is supposed to do. Take care of themselves and their people and their nation. And there's nothing new about these problems. That's why George Washington, in his farewell address as President of the United States of America, said, beware of foreign entanglements. Because the Founding Fathers understood how all these cross-border political and economic dealings had basically paralyzed Europe in this web of double dealing and constant warfare. And Washington did not want that for the new country. He wanted to just keep us isolated on our side of the planet. We're just peace through commerce. We don't have a reason to go to war with anybody. We're making good products. We're growing lots of food. We're open for business. We don't need a war. Now, China's getting ready to invest $46 billion in new energy infrastructure along the new Silk Road heading into Pakistan. And this is another way in which America's economic control of the world and its energy resources is in decline. Now, down in Venezuela, they're in serious, serious trouble. And they have been put there, in part by machinations by the U.S. government, several attempted coup d'etats. They haven't been able to succeed with that. And the latest move is a recommendation that the only way out for Venezuela's debt problem is to accept dollarization. And basically saying that Venezuela will adopt the U.S. dollar as their national currency and all will be well. Basically, the whole point of Bretton Woods was to get everybody using the U.S. dollar. And nobody wants to use the U.S. dollar anymore, and that includes Venezuela, which has just made an oil-for-food deal with Uruguay to try and get their supermarkets restocked. And we're seeing a lot of countries doing this. Russia's doing it with Iran. We will trade you these goods for these goods. And there's no currency being exchanged. There's nothing going through the electronic computer system of the bankers. It's a national-level system of barter, and it works just fine. China is still accumulating physical gold as hard as they can. So is Russia, and yet the gold and silver prices remain down through manipulation. China and Russia are taking advantage of the artificially low prices. Oh, yeah, if Wall Street's going to keep the price of gold down, we'll go on buying it as fast as we can. And so should you. You should have as much physical gold and silver as you can get your hands on right now. Because the more we buy makes it harder for the New York Federal Reserve to get back the gold they need to return to all those countries and foreign banks and individuals who think they have their gold bullion safely stored in New York. And as Germany found out, they don't. Multi-billion-dollar hedge fund manager saying ultimately quantitative easing will fail. Of course it will. It's the harbinger of hyperinflation. He's saying when it comes apart, U.S. and China might go into recession at the same time. Well, China's on the doorstep. China became too dependent on selling their products here in the United States of America. And we're seeing signs of recession here in the U.S., even if the government continues to insist, oh, no, absolutely not. We're not in recession. Everything's just hunky-dory here. I know we got a caller waiting on the line, but I'm going to have to let you wait through the commercial break because we're almost out of time in this segment, and I don't want to get you started there, but we will get to your call next segment. Major protest in Germany against the TTIP. That's the Atlantic version of the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact. They're worried that it's giving away too much sovereignty of their nation to multinational corporations. They're angry over the prohibitions on GMO labeling. And they're saying that all this promise of billions to the people who sign these trade deals, that money has to be taken away from somebody else. And they're tired of being the wallet to the rest of Europe. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We've got a caller waiting on the line I'm going to get to in a minute, but I want to get some of these economic headlines out of the way. World Economic Forum's Indonesia 2015, Russia hopes to see multi-currency world despite U.S. opposition. Now, at the end of World War II, when most transactions were still being settled either with outright bullion or boxes of printed paper notes, having a single acknowledged global currency actually made sense. But in this day and age of instantaneous global financial electronic transaction, there really isn't a need or a justification for everybody to say, I'm going to use this one currency and go through this third-party country to get that currency, to borrow it at interest in order to conduct commerce. In today's global electronic economy, two parties, two nations, two corporations, two individuals can do business with whatever currency they agree to mutually. It's simply not needed. Another story we're getting out here, IMF warning regulators to brace for global liquidity shock. They're going to have to start printing up all this instant money. Part of the problem, and we've heard them in the last couple of weeks, you know, the problem with the economy is people are refusing to buy things on credit. They're refusing to borrow. Well, because ordinary people are a lot more responsible than governments and central bankers who will borrow like crazy and not it's somebody else's problem to pay it back. Steen Jacobson is out there saying, get ready for the biggest margin call in history. Apparently, Wall Street did not learn from 1929. Layoffs are beginning at U.S. Steel. And here's a story here. Student debt accounts for nearly half of U.S. government assets. Now, for most people, we think of an asset as a building, a factory, a house, a car, real estate, bullion, coins, whatever. But to accountants, an account receivable is considered an asset on your balance sheet, that the money will be there at some point in the future, therefore the books will balance out, and we can take those assets, meaning the accounts receivables, and bundle them up and sell them off to a third party. It's an accounting trick. And it works as long as the economy will allow the repayment of all that debt. But a debt is not really an asset. An asset's value is there right at the moment. A debt is the promise of an asset at some point in the future. And in the economy, more and more of those promises cannot be kept. Over 1/4 of all student debt loans are 1 month delinquent. And these kids who were saddled with all this school loan debt on the promise of high-paying jobs on graduation, guess what? They graduated, they're working in the fast food restaurants. The entire solvency of the U.S. government right now is based on this illusion that all of these debts owed to the U.S. government will somehow be satisfied down the road. And we know that cannot possibly happen. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Wes in, I think it's Indiana, isn't it? No, Idaho. Idaho. Okay.
Idaho.
What's on your mind?
Comment and a question. Netanyahu's speeches in front of Congress remind me of Joseph Stalin and his speeches where the people present applauded until Joseph Stalin put up his hand to have them stop, because out of fear, the KGB, the Cheka, was watching the audience and finding anyone was not loyal enough to continue to applaud until Stalin asked them to stop. Now, I'd like to see that Russia has changed. It's no longer the USSR, but Sylvia Stoltz, would she have been any better off under Putin's new Russia than in Austria?
That's a really complex issue because we need to know what Sylvia what was going on in the backstory on that. But there is absolutely no question that the new Russian republics are not the former Soviet Union. It's a completely different situation. When the Soviet Union collapsed from its economic problems and its internal corruption, the new Russian republics that rose corrected a great many of those issues. And I have a lot of listeners and readers who are in Russia who confirm that life under the Russian republics is considerably better than it was under the Soviet Union. And I think after we weather the collapse of our current economy and federal government and rebuild a nation on its original founding principles, that life is going to be a lot better here.
I'd like to think that things are better, but I'm pointing out Putin signed a bill that made it a crime to deny the Holocaust, subject to a 5-year penalty. And I'm also researching...
Well, okay, Wes, he did that at a time when he was still trying to work with the West and the international community, and anywhere that Israel goes, the first thing they ask for is you will sign this law, criminalizing Holocaust denial, or we will not allow our friends in the banks to loan you the money that you need or do business with you. And Putin just did it out of a sense of expediency. I would not be surprised to see that law rescinded as tensions against the West continue to increase, okay?
So I hold my breath. I'm researching an issue right now. Someone's saying that Putin's mother was one of the tribe, should we say?
Well, you know something with I mean, most of the Ashkenazi Jews came from Russia. They after the fall of Khazaria, they migrated north into Russia and westward into Europe. That's where the European and Russian Jews all come from. And so I think if you go back far enough in anybody's family tree, you're going to find that there is Jewish blood. I mean, my family on my father's side, the Rivero name, that's a Sephardic name. And, you know, the reason we're not Jewish today is because the Inquisition got hold of my ancestors and tortured them into seeing the benefits of Christianity. So I wouldn't make too much over this issue about somebody has Jewish ancestry. The only time it really becomes an issue is when a politician is trying to prove they're a friend of Israel and they say, oh, we just discovered at Ancestry.com that my great-great-great-great-uncle on my mother's twice-removed cousin's side came from Israel. And they'll wave that around as proof of their bona fides for Jewish support of their campaign financing and election, okay? But I wouldn't read too much into that. You know, how you judge Putin is by what kind of a job he's doing for the people of the Russian Republic, and certainly he has shown himself on the world stage to be a statesman. He tamped down the situation in Syria. He's trying to keep the situation in Ukraine down. Same thing with Iran. He's going on out and achieving peace through commerce, and stands in stark contrast with the constant belligerence we're seeing from the United States and from Israel.
Well, signing that law denying the Holocaust, making a 5-year crime, I'm a little suspect.
Well, Wes, I mean, you're not going to agree 100% with the man, and I don't. I'm a little taken aback by the Russian Republic's handling of the gay issue. But nobody's going to agree with me 100%. Nobody's going to agree with anybody else 100%. You have to look at the totality of the job he's doing and not obsess about this one little detail. Because that was politically arrived at. Probably the same thing with the gay issue as well. Putin is playing politics with his own people the way our candidates play politics with us. But again, if you look at the total of the job he's doing, he's certainly doing a good job for the Russian republics, and he's certainly proving himself to be a global statesman. And he's really making Obama and Cameron and even Netanyahu look very poor in comparison. So we're coming up here on the top of the hour in the news break. Wes, I'm going to let you go here. And getting on back real quick to this situation over Walmart's sudden closing of all these stores. And somebody was trying to put it out there that it was connected with Jade Helm, and it was, you know, they're going to be used for FEMA detention centers. And as it turned out, all the stores that were closed by Walmart and their employees fired were the stores where the protests began for higher wages. So it's payback. And now the workers in those stores have launched a lawsuit against Walmart claiming wrongful termination in terms of obvious retaliation for labor activism. And this is, you know, depending upon how corrupt the judge is in the case, this could go very badly against Walmart, which, as far as we can tell, they just threw a tantrum and said, all right, we'll give everybody an increase in wages, but you shut down those stores where it all began and just teach them to stay silent and be grateful for what we give them. And that's not going to go over well with a lot of people. I would not be surprised to see boycotts against Walmart as a whole start to turn up because of this. All righty. Very alarming article, Investment Watch blog. Again, the numbers are staggering. The U.S. is currently the world leader in child poverty. In the last 6 years, homeless children in America has grown by 60%. Are we the greatest nation on earth? No, we are not. We'll be back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I see somebody's calling in right now. Let's talk about politics for a little bit here. There is a new book coming out, and it's being covered on the corporate media. The book is called Clinton Cash. It's due out May 5th by HarperCollins. And it is basically full of documentation showing that foreign donors to the Clinton Foundation were rewarded through changes to U.S. policy while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. A lot of people are out there saying this may be the end. Maybe, maybe not. Hillary has a lot of baggage going into the election. She's got more baggage than Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. But her strategy may be to dump it all out there now. Cash for policy, State Department, Vince Foster, cattle futures, all of it. Just thrash it around now so that going into next year, Hillary's campaign's response to any of this stuff will be, oh, it's old news. We talked about that last year. You know, get with the present here. You know, we talk about how Hillary looks today and how well she's dressed and how great the facelift worked for her. We're not going to talk about that. That stuff happened so long ago. That's going to be their defense, and I think that's why they're letting a lot of this stuff out now. They want to get it out there. The corporate media plays with it, and from then on they're going to say, oh, it's old news. It's so yesterday. It's so 2015. You don't need to deal with it anymore. Except we're going to keep it alive here on the independent media because it doesn't matter how good Hillary looks in 2016 or what she says. Because the true measure of Hillary Rodham Clinton is the entirety of her life story and career, including the Rose Law Firm, cattle futures trades, travel office firings. Excuse me. Got something caught in my throat. Okay. Oh, boy. Don't know where that came from. All right. Let's see if I can get my voice back. All right. I'm going to let somebody else talk here. Nick in Japan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, I don't know if I lucked out. I may actually get a chance to finish my question.
Oh, well, thank you for that comment.
Well, I love you, Mike, and you know I've always called into the show. I have a great appreciation for your show. I've got unfortunately, normally when I do call in, I can't get out my question fully, so I'm just, that's what I meant to say.
Well, my voice is coming back, so you're in trouble.
Oh, Lordy.
All right, sorry about that.
Your show is magical as always. You know, I love your show. Speaking of which, I know that you worked your way through college as a magician.
Yes.
And, you were you worked for NASA and special effects. I think to a certain extent.
Never could hold a steady job, right?
Yeah. But some of your jobs, it's been about essentially making people believe what you want them to believe to a certain extent. And so I've always saw you as sort of a gatekeeper, and that Knights of Masonic Knights of Templar sword that you have in the background was your proverbial wand, if you will.
Well, let me hang on, Nick. I'm going to interrupt you again because you're making some mistakes.
Lose your voice, please.
Well, all right. Thank you very much for the phone call.
I'm joking. Go ahead.
All right. I have a drop button, and I'm not afraid to use it, and I'm in a cranky mood. All right. First of all, when I worked as a magician with bunny rabbits and flowers and doves and stuff, everybody understood it was an illusion. Yeah. And the one time, I'm going to share a little story with you. There was one time where I actually...
Oh, Mike, let me get my question in before you do.
All right, fine.
I didn't really call in for that. I just wanted to, make a little conversation. But this is what I wanted to actually say to you, because if you look at countries like Canada, because you made, with respect to the person being shot in the back, if you look at countries like Canada, our British cousins, it's not as if they've learned from their lesson. They're invading the airspace of nations, dropping bombs, killing people. They were part of the coalition in Libya, Iraq. Australia, also our British cousins, doing the same thing, killing and murdering. America, the country, and the state in which you live, where you derive a certain amount of your security. I think you live next to a military base or something like that.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by military bases.
My question is this.
Yeah, please get to the point.
My question is this. Yeah, America, countries, European countries have derived. There's been a disproportionate amount of violence, shooting people, unarmed people in the back, killing and maiming and murdering around the world. And so, I don't place a great distinction. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. I don't place a great distinction between the military and the police. Both use the man to protect and serve. Both are, they're murderers.
Well,
and
Nick, Okay, I have to interrupt you at this point. There's a very key difference there, and one is the military is engaged in war where it's just understood they're there to kill the people in front of them. The domestic police force is not technically at war with the American people, and they're not expecting...
And therein lies the true problem. Therein lies the true problem. My point is that because we started under an enslavement paradigm, it was only a matter of time before the larger group would become enslaved. And so when we look at, there's been a disproportionate amount of violence. It's almost like when a 10-year-old rapes a 10-year-old, it's terrible. Just as when a black guy murders a black guy, or a Japanese guy murders but when a 50-year-old murders a 10-year-old, or a white cop murders a black child, or rapes a Japanese girl here in Japan, what we're looking at is a situation of historical violence.
Okay, I understand where you're going. I don't think that's much of a factor. I think the difference is if there are people out there or groups who see in any of these incidents an opportunity to politicize what's going on for the gain of their agenda. It's like here in the United States of America, everybody's making a big deal about white cops killing black kids, and we've got another story. We're getting onto that in a little bit. But the reality is in this United States, police are going to pull the trigger on white people 25 times as often as they do on the black.
We've got studies to show nearly everything, though, Mike.
All right, Nick, I'm
nearly every side.
Okay, Nick, I had to cut you off because we're running out of time, and you're not letting me respond to what you've said already. And first and foremost, the sword hanging on the back of the wall is not a Templar sword. It is, in fact, a sword from the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Conan the Barbarian, and it's only a copy. De Laurentiis would not allow copies to be made. And I'm sorry for the sneezing and coughing, but it's very, very windy here, and I think there's just a lot of dust and pollen, and I normally don't get hay fever, but I think that's what's going on right now. But the sword is actually a movie prop. It's from Conan the Barbarian. It's got nothing to do with the Templars. And if the rest of your information is that uncertain, that's why I'm going to hit the drop button on you. We have two more callers waiting on the line. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time in this segment, so I'm going to ask Steve and Damien to be patient through the next commercial break, and I will get to you, but I want to give you enough time to say what it is you have to say. Another scandal that is coming back up to hit Hillary is the fact that her brother got one of just 2 gold mining permits in Haiti, which is, I guess, what all of our disaster donations have bought and paid for down there. Over at the Bunny Ranch, the hookers are all in favor of Hillary, I guess because she's a woman, but they've got the hookers for Hillary are out there. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I apologize for the sneezing and coughing, but the wind is very, very high here on Oahu today, and there's all kinds of dust and pollen and everything, and it just ganged up on me, I guess. So, all right. Before we take the phone calls, and we got a lot of phone calls to get to, I just got an email from somebody who is saying that the West's reportage of Russia's anti-gay laws is greatly exaggerated, and they sent me a report written by a gentleman named Brian Heiss. And he works for a Fortune 500 company in the U.S. He went to Russia just before the Sochi Olympics to research all of the allegations of attacks and hostility toward the gays. And what he found out is, like so much else that we're hearing about Russia in the corporate media, it is, at the very most generous, extremely out of date. Because in the Russian Federation, homosexuality was actually decriminalized in 1993. There are no laws in the Russian republics today against gays. It ended in 1993. As of 2003, gays are allowed to serve openly in the military. And I was rather roundly and justly chastised by this individual for misstating Russia's position on the gays. And for all we know, Russia may have already rescinded that law about Holocaust denial. All righty, let's take some phone calls here. We're going to go to Steve in Florida. Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. Thank you for waiting.
Hey, Mike, everybody knows that that's your Conan the Barbarian sword, and it's a Hollywood prop. I'd have hung up on that guy right then and there.
Yeah, well, I was trying to be patient, and I was letting him talk because I was having so much trouble doing so.
Yeah. You're kind of stuck there because you couldn't.
Maybe the pollen worked for him. Maybe he paid the pollen to attack my sinuses just so he could get his stuff out.
Well, what an accusation, honestly. And I was going to bring up about my understanding about the gays in Russia. It was a bunch of propaganda that they basically have the same rights as the gays that in the United States do. It was just anything to make them look bad at that point. Yeah, and obviously I got suckered in by it. And because it was being carried, on what we thought were credible news sources, and it turns out, no, they weren't. In point of fact, gays are very, very happy in Russia. They're treated with respect, and nobody's getting on their case. And I see here in the United States, as we head into the 2016 election campaign, they're trying to once again manufacture controversy over homosexuality, like they're trying to manufacture controversy over women's rights, over racism. Every election season, they play the same dirty trick. They don't want us talking about the wars. They don't want us talking about the economy. They don't want us talking about Washington, D.C. groveling to Tel Aviv. And so the corporate media's job is to create these other outside issues for us to get all in a bother about, so that we don't actually challenge the status quo. The central bankers don't care about gays or women or race. They just want money, and they want us distracted from that so they can go on taking more from us. Right. I guess we're supposed to hate gays but vote for Hillary. Anyway. Yeah, well, Anyway, let me tell you something. The other reason why I wanted to call you up is, I don't know if you saw James Corbett's very latest thing about the Oklahoma City bombing. Oh, I did. I loved it. I sent him an email saying, I love this stuff that you're doing there, It's great. He hit a home run with that thing in less than 5 minutes. He explains the whole thing, and it's just like, wow. So I just wanted to share that with your listeners. The Corbett report, and man, he just really knocked that out of the park. He did, and we did have it linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and he does. He just puts it together in this very, very short package that points out the absurdity of the official story, and I hope he keeps on making more of these. We need one about the Boston bombing. We need one of these about Saddam's nuclear weapons, and very often, as Jon Stewart himself proved, the best way to wake America up is to make it funny and entertaining so that it's less threatening when it goes after their core cherished propaganda beliefs. Right. It's not preachy. It's just like, are you kidding me? Kind of thing. But that's all I wanted to say, Mike. And, don't let that guy call back. Put him on the put him on the no-call list. All right, yeah, we'll have Tom put him on the list there, and we're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Damien in New York. Damien, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? I'm glad you got my picture. I actually had a little video of the rolling debt, but I wasn't able to send it from my phone. I'll have to send it later. But I just wanted to say what you were saying about Hillary, about them getting it out early, and yeah, it's the same thing over and over. It's the distraction, it's the manipulation, it's the altering of reality. That's the constant tactic that they have to do, because if anybody ever stops to look at the truth or just follow the money, that's all most people have to do on pretty much everything. You follow the money, and it exposes who and what that person is really all about. And so many people were saying, well, Hillary, we're not sure about her platform and everything. Yeah, we do know her platform. All you have to see is who she's been giving favors to, who she's been taking money from, and what she's been actually doing, not what she's saying, because it's the same thing. It's all these things that people get distracted in, and the way the system is manipulated. And the other thing I was going to say is this problem of little or zero accountability across the board, whether it's politicians, corporations, banks, whatever institutions, the police, all the way down. The manipulation of of the things that they do. I just want to give you a little insight of what they do in New York here. I have several friends that are with the NYPD and have been, living inside and outside of New York City for quite a while. I'm from here, but I've been in and out different places. One of the things that they do, and I'm certain that this is not only New York City that does it, if there's a crime and there's no way for them to really get a good hold on what direction they're going to go and what they, as far as evidence and this sort of thing, a lot of times those things will be shuffled under the category of miscellaneous crime. So that when they go back and look at statistics, they can say, oh, well, violent crime is down, or rape is down, or this is down, or whatever is down. So we must be doing something right. But it's really a manipulation of how they're deciding to report things or not report things. So again, this is working of the system and trying their best in every way, like from the top down, to just shuffle away any accountability.
Okay, we're going to have to cut you off. We're at the commercial break here, and I just wanted to add in that sort of manipulation of the news used to work. But in this age of the Internet and the independent media, we the people are going to decide for ourselves what the issues are going into this next election. And we're not going to be distracted by the abortion debate, the gay debate, the women's right debate, the race debate. We understand the issues for this country are the wars and the economy. All right. Thank you for the call, Damien. Got to let you go. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the show here because I'm way behind on my list of talking points, and there are some things I really want to get to on today's show and not carry forward. Now, we all know that Hillary has all this bad history and baggage. They're trying to find some way they can distract you from it. Hillary is going on out there trying to get women and college students to vote for her simply because she is a woman. And that's a bad way to judge who should be leading the country here. Hillary's out there trying to be just plain folks, even though she and her husband are intensely wealthy. She's out there saying that she will protect Americans from the Goldman Sachs's and J.P. Morgan's, but they're the top donors to her campaign. Forget about what she looks like, forget about her gender, forget about what she says, and look at her track record, her career, and her history. Bloomberg's Mark Halperin is saying that even though Wall Street has thrown their weight behind Hillary, she could still lose because of all of the growing scandals that are out there and a very skeptical electorate that isn't as easily sucked into jingoism and slogans and colored ribbons. And as a result of recent declines in Hillary's support in the swing states, there are other Democrats starting to scratch their chin and thinking, maybe I might just step into that Democratic primary and see what happens. And we have the former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, is considering taking a run in 2016. And let's see, former Senator Jim Webb said that he might step in to the primary season next year. So Hillary being a slam dunk, not as slammed as it was before. Now, Obama is out there thinking about 2016 and how to court traditional Democratic voters back into the fold. And he's dealing with the reality that a lot of the black population of the United States who just supported him blindly in 2008 and 2012 are now seriously disenchanted. And polls are showing that a lot of black voters may be voting GOP because of all the unkept promises. So Obama is trying to do an end run and bamboozle them one more time, and he's out there talking seriously about reparations for slavery. Now, this is something that happened 150 years ago. But Obama is out there saying, whoa, the present generation of blacks, they're still suffering from the effects of slavery. Like living in the United States instead of being in Africa. But I want to make a point here. My family were never slave owners. We were in the North. None of my ancestors owned slaves. In fact, my ancestors, on my mother's side of the family, in New Hampshire, operated a station on the Underground Railroad, helping escaped slaves reach Canada. Okay? Now, imagine if I went up to Canada today, and I knocked on the doors of the descendants of those escaped slaves, and I demanded payment from them today for what my ancestors had done to help their ancestors 150 years ago. They would laugh me right off the front porch, and rightly so. Now, the reality is, we have been hearing talk about slavery reparations every election cycle for decades. It's nothing but a pathetic attempt to bamboozle disenchanted black voters back to the Democratic fold. And I'm sure that the present generation of black people are smart enough to realize that's all it is. And voting the Democrats back into power will not get them reparations for something that happened before, long before we were all born. Alrighty, little story out of newsforge.com. 76 people, just 76, give them each a trombone, 76, sorry, 76 people now account for 41% of all individual and corporate donations made to the political parties and other political causes in Britain over the past 5 years. Just 76 people are dominating the entire political process. It's got the same problem here in the United States of America. Now, when this country was set up, there were limits on campaign donations by American citizens with the intention that the size of a politician's campaign war chest was a direct, obvious measure of their popular support. But over the years, we have seen all of these campaign limits lifted. We have seen corporations elevated to legal personhood and allowed unlimited spending on political donations as their expression of their First Amendment right. To where we now have the political process in both Great Britain and the United States is dominated by just a handful of very wealthy people. And that is not democracy. That is fascism. Now, out in up in New Hampshire, and I'm almost ashamed that this guy is a member of the legislature in my home state. But State Representative Michael Cahill is saying that if GOP colleagues are unwilling to raise taxes, from which we can deduce Cahill's a Democrat, that it's time to start dealing with the liabilities. And one of the liabilities that Representative Michael Cahill thinks is maybe it's time to consider euthanasia for the permanently disabled. They're of no use to us anymore. We can't make a profit off of them. They're on the red side of the ledger. Let's just, knock them off here. House Speaker Sean Jasper shut Cahill down, said his comments were inappropriate. Yeah, they were inappropriate. We're not quite yet living in the world of Logan's Run, when you're through with your usable life cycle, you're obsolete and to be disposed of. Now, here's a big story that is brewing. As you know, Sony Pictures got hacked by somebody. They tried to blame it on China, but we don't really know what's going on. In fact, most of the information seems to indicate it was an inside leak, not an outside hack. Somebody got very ticked off at management and decided they were going to dump all this stuff. And the revelations are coming out. Over at Middle East Monitor, they're looking at the Sony internal emails that are up on WikiLeaks. And they're showing very close cooperation between the top executives in Hollywood and the government of Israel and various pro-Israel lobbying groups. They're not just having lunch. They are actively cooperating to turn Hollywood into a propaganda machine for the government of Israel. Imagine my shock. I mean, those of us studying what's going on have known about this for quite a long time, but now we have the documentary proof of the heads of these studios in communication with pro-Israel lobbies and the government of Israel itself to shape the narrative of entertainment in the United States to always favor Israel. Another revelation came out where Sony deliberately amended the wording on the description of the Snowden biography movie to remove any mention of NSA surveillance, to remove any criticism of the U.S. government. Not that it did any good. We all know who Snowden is, what he did, and what he revealed. And then finally, the CEO of Sony in one of his leaked emails, called the Middle East a gigantic mess and said if it was not for Israel's presence in the region, the United States would let them all kill each other. Apparently he thinks that's a good idea. And, of course, in response to all these new revelations, Sony once again is out there telling the U.S. corporate media, don't you report on these leaked emails. Don't you rat us out to the American people. Too late. The corporate media is not in control of the discussion anymore. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm going to fit in a little bit of global warming and some science before we hit the end of the program. It's currently hailing in Texas. Major storms across the East Coast. Tornado watch in Washington, D.C. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, I hope it misses all those cool museums because I'd like to see them someday. Now, up in British Columbia, with the official start of spring, the Forestry Service up in British Columbia began a project for reforestation in southern British Columbia, replacing trees that have been lost to logging, land development, whatever. Went out there and planted millions of seedlings to start growing new trees. Got hit with a cold snap. Killed them all. Now, you know that Al Gore is out there screaming that CO2 means warming. And they were doing this back in 1970. Oh, it's carbon dioxide's fault. But the reality is that we just had another very hard winter. It arrived early. It's lingering late. And still, the carbon Nazis are out there trying to figure out some way they can bamboozle you into thinking that human-caused global warming is why there's all this snow and ice. Now, just as Africa finally seems to have gotten that Ebola outbreak under control, there is a new illness that has cropped up in Nigeria. This one is serious situation. They have had this breakout in Ode Irele town. 17 people have died. Actually, 18 are dead. This illness, symptoms are headache, weight loss, blurred vision, loss of consciousness, and basically kills the victims within 24 hours of their falling ill. Now, I had somebody who wrote in who said that the symptoms are those of weaponized botulism or a possible nerve agent. So maybe somebody dropped another test tube at the bioweapons lab, because there are reasons to suspect that the Ebola outbreak actually began at a medical clinic in Kenema that was basically paid millions of dollars to test an anti-Ebola vaccine. And we know that these attenuated pathogen vaccines have a bad habit of flashing back to full potency. Happened with the oral polio vaccine. Seems to be happening with the current measles and whooping cough vaccine, because every time they talk about, oh, there's another epidemic outbreak, it turns out most of the people who are sick got the vaccines. So now we're hearing from GlaxoSmithKline. They're recalling their current 4-in-1 flu vaccine, Fluvaval, because they're acknowledging it might cause more harm than good. And they're saying it's being recalled due to effectiveness issues. They admitted a month ago it's absolutely not working because the current flu strains in the U.S. are not in this vaccine. This vaccine was designed to protect against type A and B and 2 of the flu strains, which is why it's a quadrivalent vaccine, but it's not the 4 that we're dealing with here. And yes, it has thimerosal, the preservative, in there. The ingredients of Fluval include the inactivated influenza virus, and that is risky. They don't always stay inactivated. It contains formaldehyde. Now, formaldehyde is a known carcinogen. My wife is hypersensitive to it. If she'd gotten the flu shot, she would be in serious pain right now. Saline, which is okay, it's the carrier there, the thimerosal, polysorbate. Now, they're not saying which polysorbate they're using, but polysorbate 80 is used as a food filler product. I don't know what they're doing with it in a vaccine, but it is known that polysorbate 80 in the body affects your ability to reproduce. Now, especially with the situation in Kenya, where the typhus vaccination has been confirmed to include chemicals to sterilize women. The recall of the flu vaccine and all these other issues. How can the state of California or any other state sit up there and say, we will force you to have this vaccine whether you want it or not because we, the government, know better than you do? We don't know what's in those vaccines. We don't know if they're really going to work. Back in 1976, the swine flu vaccine killed 50 times as many people as the swine flu did. The measles vaccine is killing hundreds of people. Measles isn't. Nobody in the U.S. has died of measles in 10 years. But the vaccine for measles has killed over 100 people, according to the vaccine court. And the number could even be higher, because that vaccine court is there to limit financial damages to the pharmaceutical industry from bad products. Story out of RINF.com. Roundup toxic to human cells at levels allowed in drinking water. Like everything else that is dangerous, there are supposed safe levels in the drinking water. The latest research is showing that the allowed levels of Roundup, glyphosate, in our drinking water can cause harm. It's toxic to human cells. It's an endocrine disruptor. The study was done in Western Australia. Down in Argentina, 30,000 doctors and health professionals are demanding a ban on glyphosate because of the damage they're seeing down in their country. Meanwhile, of course, Monsanto is furious at the World Health Organization for claiming glyphosate might cause cancer. Well, my goodness. And they're out there on the attack. Their lobbyists are out there saying the World Health Organization has something to explain. Well, they already did. They held up the report with the research and saying, yeah, there's a link. It seems to be causing cancer. That's all the explanation you need. Basically, Monsanto is trying to take the position that World Health Organization is working for some dark, nefarious conspiracy that's anti-progress and anti-Monsanto. Have you ever noticed that when it's in their interest, they'll claim there's a conspiracy? Like Hillary Clinton's vast right-wing conspiracy, then conspiracy's okay. But when it's people talking about 9/11 or the Boston bombing, then conspiracy's a bad word. Monsanto has actually been caught hiring trolls on the internet to go around and attack anybody questioning the wisdom and benefit of GMO technology. Apparently, it's cheaper to lie to the public than actually come out with a quality product in this day and age. Out in California, they're dealing with the drought. Cattle ranchers are fighting over pasture lands because a lot of the pasture land is going back to desert, which is what California was originally. Now, there's an article over the Daily Beast, the big idea, California is so over, we're going to go into the Valley speak here, and it's basically saying California's infrastructure has been allowed to decay. I wonder where you heard that one before. And more importantly, it simply was not being kept up and expanded to deal with the soaring population. California's water system was put together. The last installation were the aqueducts in the 1970s. They haven't added anything since then. And California's population is growing. It is swelling with all these illegals. And the system, even if working perfectly, is overstressed. And moves to expand or repair the water system keep getting blocked by the government, which wants to spend the money on other things, like free pony rides for the illegal immigrants. And here's an example of just how bizarre it is. Over at 12160.info, they have a story about how in the Endangered Species Act in California has mandated the release of fresh drinking water into a river to flow into the ocean in order to protect an endangered 3-inch fish, the Delta smelt, to make sure it's got enough water to swim in. Now, I'm sorry about the Delta smelt, okay, but where are the priorities of our governmental system where fish are held to be equally important to human beings? I think that tells us a lot of what we need to know about the current government attitude toward we the people. We're not human beings deserving of respect. We're just another herd, another livestock to be managed here. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here, get some animation work done, pay a few bills. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, get angry, share what you know with who you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.